Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. I am delighted to be with you, as always, for another Tuesday author interview. Hope you're having a great week so far. As we get started, I do want to remind you to please like, follow, subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you either listen to it or watch it on. That really does help. Also, if you want to support the podcast and the network in another way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. There you can leave a tip or a donation. You can also leave a question or a comment, which I would be happy to answer any questions or engage with any comments at the beginning of the next episode after those are left. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.info. It's a different way to support not only this podcast, but the network as well. Your support means so much to me and the network as a whole. It's greatly appreciated, however you support us. As we get started, like I said, I hope you're having a really good week. It's been a good day. I got my first sunburn of the season, which I am not happy about because I have been super good about the sunscreen this year, and I've been using sunscreen for months because it's warm here and we get a lot of sun, and the sun is very intense. And today we went for our usual walk. It was lovely, beautiful this morning, and then decided later in the day that we needed to walk to the grocery store. We needed to go to the grocery store, decided to walk to the grocery store. And I sunscreened my face and just skipped the sunscreen on my arms and my shoulders, which was incredibly stupid because now I have a sunburn and I'm very mad at myself. But it is what it is. And anyway, other than that, it's been a really good day. And I hope that you also are having a really good day. We walked 11 and a half miles today between our two walks, which is crazy. And the high today was 80. So really beautiful weather, just perfect, gorgeous, wonderful weather. And there's a breeze out there now. And yeah, I'm talking too much about the weather. Let's maybe instead talk about a book, shall we? This week, as I mentioned at the end of last week's episode, I am speaking with Stacy Stokes. We're talking about her second novel. It is a speculative thriller. Let me go ahead and give you the description of the book. It is called The Darkness Rises. Someone wants revenge. Whitney knows what death looks like. Since she was 7, she's seen it hover over strangers' heads in dark, rippling clouds. Sometimes she can save people from the darkness. Sometimes she can't. But she's never questioned if she should try. Until the unthinkable happens, and a person she saves becomes the perpetrator of a horrific school shooting. Now Whitney will do anything to escape the memory of last year's tragedy and the guilt that gnaws at her for her role in it. Even if that means quitting dance, the thing she loves most, and hiding her ability from her family and friends. But most importantly, no one can know what really happened last year. Then Whitney finds an ominous message in her locker and realizes someone knows her secret. As the threats pile up, one thing becomes clear. Someone wants payback for what she did, and if she's going to survive the year, she must track down whoever is after her before it's too late. So that is The Darkness Rises. The author is Stacy Stokes. And you know that I am learning to really enjoy thrillers more than I ever used to. This is the second of 3 thrillers we have in a row. Next week's interview is also with an author who writes thrillers, and we'll be talking more about that at the end of this episode. I like speculative thrillers. I like thrillers that are keep you on the edge of your seat, keep you guessing, but aren't really graphic or over the top scary. And this is definitely one of them. It's fast paced. It keeps you, there's some twists and turns. There's some really great characters. I like the concept of Whitney, the main character. It's just a touch of magic in this book, just a touch of the supernatural. She can see dark clouds over people's heads, and she knows that they are going to die, and that she can tell how close they are because she has a classmate, and it's kind of a gray cloud, and she tells that classmate to please go to the doctor. Which is a weird conversation, right? Because nobody knows that she can do this. And so you have some random person come up and just say, please go to the doctor. And you're thinking, okay, great, but why are you so weird? So there's a lot of complications with this gift, especially when you aren't telling anybody about it. Although, if you did tell anybody about it, would they believe you? And that plays a part in it too. So it's a good story. It's I like the main character. I like the secondary characters surrounding Whitney and the way they play into the story, and some of the red herrings that get thrown in there. So if you're a fan of thrillers, then this would be a good one. Let's go ahead now and turn to the interview. Again, the book is called The Darkness Rises. The author is Stacy Stokes. Hi, Stacy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I am excited to have you here. We're going to talk about your book. Before we do that, though, if you wouldn't mind sharing just a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you, that would be great.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Stokes. I'm the author of The Darkness Rises and Remember Me Gone. When I'm not writing, I work as a marketing professional. I live in the Bay Area. I have a almost 3-year-old, a dog named Elvis Presley, and a husband who helps me wrangle all of them. Grew up in Dallas. I still call that home, visit quite often, although I've been out here in California now for well over a decade. So I guess that's really become my
Nice.
home. But yeah, that's
Well,
kind of me in a nutshell.
good. Well, we were talking about a little bit before the break that you live in Oakland. I used to live in the Bay Area. I also used to live in Plano. So
Nice. That is where I grew. Well, Carrollton, which is right by Plano. So
right.
basically the same thing.
Yeah. Um, so we have a little bit in common there. Um, as you mentioned, this book is The Darkness Rises. It's your second. Can you give an overview of the story?
Yeah, so The Darkness Rises is about Whitney, who is a girl who can see dark clouds hovering over strangers' heads when they are in moral peril. And she spent her whole life saving people, never questioned whether or not she should intervene until one day she saves a boy from her school who goes on to do something pretty horrendous. He's the culprit in a mass shooting for at a football game. And the book takes place a year after that tragedy. And Whitney now questions whether or not it's her job to interfere when she sees these dark clouds hovering, which of course creates some interesting tension. But she thinks that nobody knows about not only what she can do, but also her role in the shooting the year prior until she shows up at school and there is an ominous note in her locker that lets her know somebody knows her secret and they are out for revenge. Dun dun
Yes.
dun.
Somebody knows her secret in quite specific detail.
Right, right.
Not they're not just kind of extrapolating. You can tell that they know more than she thinks they should.
Exactly.
What was your inspiration for the story?
Yeah, I wish I could say there was some magic really well thought out thing, but I was actually just cleaning my house, vacuuming to be specific. And the line that is now the beginning line to chapter 2, it used to be the beginning line to the whole book, popped into my head. And that is I was 7 the first time I saw the darkness. And I turned off the vacuum cleaner and kind of looked around the house and was just like, what, where did that come from? But that line was the impetus for the whole book. I found myself wondering what darkness and who is this voice in my head? And the story slowly took shape. It took me several years to really work through exactly what this book would be, but I had a lot of fun crafting it and figuring out what would happen next from that one single line.
And did that line stay in your brain or did you write it down right away?
Well, I wrote it down right away. I've learned over the years, if I don't write it down, it will fly away. I can't assume that I will remember it. Although this one really did stick with me, so maybe I would have been okay. But I have many an idea that was lost from waking up in the middle of the night and believing I would remember it the next morning, and that never happens.
Yeah. I kind of get it though, because vacuuming is a little bit mindless. It's a little bit like that place you get in the shower where your brain just starts to travel. So,
Yep,
um,
yep.
yeah,
A little
I,
meditative.
it's nice that something came out of housework besides more housework later.
Right.
um,
That's the way housework goes.
yes. Um, so let's talk a little bit more about Whitney as the main character. What about her do you think is going to resonate with readers?
I think she's, she's going through very real human emotions, even though this is a story that has, magical elements related to it. And she feels this push and pull between who she used to be and who she now is, and doing the right thing. And what does right look like? And I think that's an inherent thing that we all go through in terms of who do we want to be when we grow up? How do we deal with choices and their potential consequences? So, my hope is that people really relate with the emotion to the story, with her grief over what happened, as well as her trying to find her footing and moving forward in this new world that she lives in.
So, as I said, I think at the beginning, I do find Whitney to be a really compelling main character, especially since this started when she was 7. She's a senior in high school during this book, and I mean, it's a really intriguing issue for anyone to have, especially at this young of an age. That would be incredibly difficult at any age, but then learning to deal with it, and going through junior high and high school with this particular thing, no pun intended, hanging over her head. I just can't imagine. Really glad that an author has not written me into this book. But we are going to go ahead and take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Whitney as that main character, and how the fact that her character developed this skill, ability, problem, however you want to call it, at such a young age, how that affects Whitney's story arc and her development as a character. So stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Stacy Stokes. Before the break, we were talking about the main character, Whitney. And as before we go back into that conversation, I do want to remind you just one more time that to support the podcast in a slightly different way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. You can leave a tip or a donation, a question or a comment, all of the above, and I would love to engage with those questions and comments. But your tip and donation really does, as I said, help not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. And once again, thank you so much for all of the support that you give me, this podcast, this network, etc. As I said, we were talking about Whitney, the main character of The Darkness Rises, before the break, and we are going to continue that conversation now. So let's return to the interview with author Stacy Stokes. I thought it was interesting because you're my second interview, last week's interview and now this week's interview, both thrillers, and both have female protagonists whose abilities, let's say, started when they were 7.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting, but for this story, it's really hard because she's 7 and she experiences this for the first time with the clouds and the darkness. And when you're 7, she's not understanding. She just wants to tell everybody what's happening and try to figure it out. So can you talk a little bit about starting at that age for her, and how that affects her character and development?
Yeah. She has a grandmother in the story who plays a pretty central role, not just in the story, but in Whitney's life. And before the first time that Whitney sees the clouds, her grandma, who she calls Gams, tells her, hey, you might see something strange, like a little rain cloud hovering over somebody's heads. If you do, don't tell anybody. And if you don't worry about it. So of course she sees the cloud hovering over a man's head and she gets very excited because she realizes, oh, this must be what my grandmother mentioned. And to your point, she's 7. She can't wait to tell everybody. So she tells her mom, she tells her brother, she tells her dad. And one of the things, the lines that her grandma tells her very early on, that's repeated throughout the book, is people are afraid of the things they don't understand. And this ability is something they won't understand. And so she innocently starts telling everybody because she can't hold it back, but then gets to experience the fear, even from her own family, that people have when she sees things that she doesn't understand. So it's this combination of people's reaction to what she says she's seeing and experiencing, as well as the advice given to her by her grandmother that ultimately forces her to look inward and hold this information. But thankfully, she does have her grandma, which becomes sort of an outlet and a person that she can share this with. So she's not completely alone, but it is pretty isolating to have this big thing in your life that you have to keep a secret from everyone, including your best friend, which certainly comes to play out in the book. And without giving too much away, it does become a big life lesson for her throughout the story, growing up treating everything as if you have to hold it inside and keep it a secret and deal with it on your own. And, towards the end of the book, she realizes the power of connection and that we need each other, that we need friends and we need family and we need people. And the only way to really have those people wholly in your life is to share what you're going through so they can help you through it.
Yeah, I agree. And it is a thriller. And so you've got those elements of the unknown and, some fearful things happening, but it really is, those relationships come into play so much as the story moves forward.
That's right.
When it comes to your characters, then, how much character development do you do before you start writing, and how much do you do while you're writing?
Yeah, most of mine really comes out, I think, during the revision phase. I always describe my writing a bit like building a house. I start with concept and plot first. So that first draft is really just the forward momentum of the story. And oftentimes my characters are pretty shallow. And it's not until I revise it, I read through it, that I start to really build out who they are and get to more of an emotional core of a story, which I know it's back. It's always blows my I have a critique group and blows some of their minds that I do that, because they always start with the character and then they're trying to figure out the plot first. But for whatever reason, I've just always been compelled by the plot than the characters. Although, of course, to move a story forward, you have to have that central character development. So you see it on the page initially, but it's pretty shallow until I really can get in there and start to think about, okay, I have the general, like the siding put up now. Now let's put on the curtains. Let's put some paint on the wall. Let's make this a little more vivid.
Yeah. And I'm always fascinated because, you've got your protagonist, and their character arc and development is of course super important to the story, but in some ways secondary characters of course are just as important, and especially in a thriller or a mystery where you're trying to figure out what's going on. So what's the process for you as you're writing this? Because you don't want people to figure it out on page 10.
Right.
But you want to build those characters. So do you have a system for that, or does it happen more organically?
In many ways, it happens organically. There's always some character that's usually not the main character that I like to make a little funny. So I had a lot of fun with Whitney's best friend, Marissa, and then the love interest, Isaac, his best friend and cousin, Bo. They get the best one-liners and just putting some comedy, because there is something about a thriller. You're winding up all of this tension, and I find having a little bit of comedic relief sort of loosens the tension so you can wind that spring back up throughout. So I have a loose sense of who they are, but honestly, a lot of it comes to me in the moment as I'm shaping those characters and shaping those scenes. That piece of it really comes to life. But the other thing when writing a thriller that I try to do is make everybody just a little bit suspicious to throw off. And a lot of times I have to do that back in the revision process, but it doesn't take much. It's just like putting a little spotlight on different people to give them either a motive or a secret or something that the reader might take away to be like, this person is a little suspicious. They could potentially have something to do with what's going on. So those are intentional red herrings and breadcrumbs left throughout, some very overtly and some a little more subtly, just to give a longer list of potential suspects.
Right. Were there any particular types of research that you did for the story?
Not a ton, except because this did deal with a really sensitive topic, because it's in the aftermath of a school or a football game shooting. I did quite a bit of research into just the impact that something like that has on a community. I wanted to be really true, not just to Whitney's reaction to the world around her, but how would the community be impacted? How would people be feeling? What kinds of things would be happening around them? So that was a place where I spent some time, and there's an author's note in the back too, where you get a sense for some of the things that I came across as I was reading the information that I found, and sort of how that idea came to be a part of this story.
Yeah. Not easy research, I wouldn't think, in those
No,
terms.
no, it's definitely
Um,
not, but a little cathartic because am a mom, and I am realizing the world around me, and the what I'm going to be sending my child out into the world into as she starts school, and it's terrifying. So
yes.
that certainly was a motivator. A lot of this was me trying to understand what the world looks like now, and just come
Yeah.
to terms with the reality that she's going to face, and I am also going to face.
Yeah, absolutely. On a lighter note, Whitney and Marissa and other characters are dancers. Her grandmother was a dancer that plays into the story. Are you a dancer? Was that autobiographical, or did you research that at all?
Yeah, no, very autobiographical. I was on my high school dance team. I have always wanted to write a story where dance was a big part of it. So this was sort of my love letter to the dance team, and just the fun and the camaraderie and the competitiveness that you
Hmm.
have. And also just the importance of that when I was in high school, right? Whatever activity you have, it sort of becomes the center of your universe when you're that age. So hopefully that played through in the pages, because that was the center of Whitney's universe. And then, of course, she gives it up because she's punishing herself in so many ways, and then ultimately has to decide whether or not she's going to let herself go back to the things that she loves doing. So, yeah, no research needed there, because that was all 100% me and true to the experiences that I had growing up.
Nice. What about thrillers do you think draws you to writing within the genre?
I have always loved thrillers and things that just kind of got my heart racing from a young age. So my mom was, and still is, an avid reader, and she would leave books everywhere. She always had a book with her. I remember being mortified because we would be in line at the grocery store, and she'd pull out like a rubber banded paperback and just start reading. And it's like, Mom, come on, like you can go without a book for 5 seconds.
No, no.
But she loved kind of it was either Stephen King or girl in peril stories, and they were all over the house. And Stephen King in particular, I remember like peeking and reading some of the stories. It kept me up for weeks on end after I read a couple of chapters. But there was
Yeah.
something thrilling about this, not just reading what my mom told me not to read, but also just a story that was propelled forward by a mystery and that sense of doom. It always has appealed to me. And then once I discovered once I could actually start picking out my own books and reading for myself, I discovered the young adult section of the library, and was very drawn to Christopher Pike and R.L. Stine, not to date myself, but the 80s thriller authors of the time. And I read every single one. So it's kind of no surprise that is what I like to write, because it was always what I was attracted to. And
Sure.
I don't know, I like to get my pulse going a little bit, and also try to put the pieces together on a mystery and figure out what's going on.
Right.
And I've always loved a little bit of fantasy sprinkled into the pages, just a little bit of magic.
Yeah, a little bit. Do you know where your thrillers are going to end up? So do you start at the end and work kind of backwards, or do you let it evolve?
A little bit of both. I usually know what's the inciting incident. I have a pretty good sense of who the bad person will be, although sometimes I may shift and change as the story goes on, but generally have a sense of that. And usually there are one or two scenes that I'm writing towards, if that makes sense, almost like
Mhm.
little gifts to myself, scenes that I'm really excited to write, and that it's the how do I get to those scenes. But beyond that, I'm more of a pantster when it comes to writing. So I'm just flying by the seat of my pants, figuring it out, which, for better or worse, is when you're trying to write a tightly plotted thriller, it probably ends up with more revision than I would have had if I would have actually just written an outline from the onset. But it
Right.
helps me discover a little bit more as I go along.
And you have to do what works for you, right? You can't force yourself to write in a way that doesn't make sense.
That's right. I try to do an outline and then I end up writing a scene and getting into something, and then it's just all, yeah. And maybe someday, maybe the next book.
You never know. Do you want to take a minute to talk about your first book a little bit?
Yeah, that would be great. So my first book, my debut, is called Remember Me Gone. It is also a speculative thriller, although more of a mystery, I'd say, than a thriller, in terms of you don't have the revenge plot that you have in The Darkness Rises. But it is about a girl named Lucy who grew in a very small border town in Texas called Tumbletree. And her family runs a business that takes away people's unwanted memories and heartaches. So people come from all over to this small town to have their memories erased by Lucy's father, and her dream is to one day take over the memory house. And then she goes to attempt taking her first memory and sees something in her dad's head that makes her a little bit suspicious. And as the story unwinds, she starts to discover that her own memories have been erased, which is a big no-no. You don't take away somebody's memories without their permission, and that something sinister is happening in her town and to the fellow townspeople. So she sets out with some friends to figure out what the heck is going on.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely. And seeing the magical realism in there. So
yeah, more a little. I love the sprinkle of magic in everything I write.
Absolutely. No, you should never assume, right? And yet I assumed that the first novel would be kind of similar-ish to this one. I don't know why, but at any rate, I am intrigued, definitely intrigued by the concept and the different level of magical realism. It's definitely one that I want to check out. We are about to now take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, we will be talking about what Stacy is currently working on. So stay tuned. You are listening to and or watching the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Stacy Stokes. Before the break, she was talking about her first novel, Remember Me Gone, and now we are going to talk about her work in progress. So let's go ahead and return to the interview and the conclusion of this conversation with Stacy. And what are you working on now?
So right now I am dabbling a bit in middle grade. I mentioned I've always loved thrillers and things that get my heart racing. I have always wanted to write a really scary book for kids because I was very attracted to that. Scary stories to tell in the dark. I think I read that 100 times as a kid. So I am attempting a middle grade horror, which has been really fun, just trying to explore a younger voice. So we'll see where that takes me. It is about a shadow monster who wants a new playmate.
Nice. Did you have or planning on having, or how does that work? Do you have beta readers? How do you know if it's not too scary? Like middle grade, that can go anywhere from me, who was an absolute total wimp, to my nieces who's loved horror at the age of like 3. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I am very fortunate to have a great group of writing friends. About a decade ago, I joined a critique group of fellow Bay Area writers, about 6 of us, and we have largely stayed together over that time. And they put their eyes on everything I write. We typically will turn in about 12 chapters at a time, or 12 pages at a time on a monthly basis, just to keep each other accountable and read our work. So I get feedback through that process as I'm writing. And then once we complete a project, when you're ready, they will do beta reads for all of us, and then we sit around and give each other feedback live, which is really helpful because they give you the feedback and then everybody kind of builds and helps you break into what's working, what's not working. So I will absolutely be getting their take on it, and because this one is horror, I probably will tap into a few friends' kids if their parents will let me, just to get their sense on, is it too scary enough? But for now, because I'm still in that early phase, I'm just gonna let it fly, and I can always peel it back. But we'll see where it lands.
Okay, fun. you were an avid reader growing up. Did you always want to write, or did you decide to do that later? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I did always want to write. From a very young age, if you asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said I was a writer. I think getting to the writing took a long time, but I was always writing off and on throughout my life. Starting in probably middle school with really terrible poetry and angsty filled chapters that were blatant knockoffs of whatever I was reading at the time. And then I always had an attempt at a novel. And I say attempt because it would maybe only be a couple of chapters on and off throughout my life. But it was about 15 years ago that I had an idea for a story and told myself, I'm going to write this from start to finish. And I did. It took me about a year to write a very terrible draft of a book. But then once I finished it, that's what set me on the course of saying, okay, now how do I get this published? And started researching publication, learned that if you want traditional publication, you have to go through an agent, discovered what a query letter was, met a lot of writers throughout the process, ultimately joined what is my current critique group. That book never saw the path that I wanted, but it helped me learn how to finish a project, edit a project, and receive and adapt the feedback of others. So I really look at that first book as a big practice project,
Yeah.
and then just stuck with it because I committed to myself that I would do that.
Okay. From that experience, then, what advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Yeah, keep going. Just keep writing and don't give up because it is a long road. It takes a long time, not just to write a book, but to edit that book, to find, if you decide to pursue traditional publication, to find an agent, to then sign a publishing deal. It just takes a long time, and it also takes some thick skin. So don't give up because there is no author in the whole world who has not faced a lot of rejection in the process. So just push forward with that love of craft. And then my second piece of advice is find a community. That for me was a really big turning point when I met writer friends and I started to invite them into reading my work and critiquing my work, and also through critiquing and reading their work. It sort of helps you have to articulate what isn't working in a way that is constructive, actually helps you to start figuring out a little more about plotting and character development and what works and what doesn't. So it's a helpful training tool. And it just also helps when you're going through it and you're in the trenches of query land trying to find an agent, or submission land trying to find an editor. It's just helpful to have some friends who have been there and get it.
Yeah. Yep. When you take the time to read just for you, not for research or anything else, what are your thrillers, probably, but go-to authors and genres?
Yeah, I mean, I read all over just because I need variety, but my heart is always with some sort of speculative thriller or mystery. So I would say like anything by Maggie Stiefvater. I mean, give it to me. I've read it probably twice, with the Scorpio Races being one of my all-time favorites. I love Jenny Myers Sain, is kind of a more recent author who has a number of speculative thriller-ish books out there. But then I also love an occasional rom-com. I just read Emily Henry's latest to clear my mind and make things a little lighthearted. I love the classic thriller, or I should say classically plotted thriller in modern settings, like Lucy Foley, anything she reads. So yeah, I'm a big fan of reading broadly, but get my pulse racing and you'll have my heart.
Yeah. What is your 3-year-old obsessed with reading right now?
Gosh, I'm so thrilled that she loves reading anything we can get our hands on, but she tends to write. She's very into counting books right now, which is great. And whatever books I try to get her to read, I like the funny ones that have a little more of a plot. She's not quite there yet, but she'll give all of it a try. She loves going to the library, and we're very into Paw Patrol right now. So if there's a Paw Patrol character on the front of it, you better believe she will have you read it and then read it again. And then read it after that.
Yeah.
But she's a lot of fun. She really enjoys books, which is great to see.
Yeah, love it. Website, if you want to know about you and your books, if you have a website, share that, as well as any social media that you're active on.
Yeah, you can find me at stacystokes.com. And if you're on Instagram or the artist formerly known as Twitter, you can find me at Stacy A as in Apple Stokes.
And when I looked you up on Amazon, there was Stacy Stokes, and there is a Stacy A Stokes that's an author, but that's not you, correct?
Nope, they're all me.
They're all you. Okay. So
They should hopefully be merging those accounts. There was a little bit of miscommunication.
Good to know though. So in case people are looking, that is you. Thank you.
Yep, that's me.
Stacy, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to make sure that you highlighted during this time?
No, I think you covered it. I was gonna squeeze in a little plug for my first book, but you asked. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I want to say thank you as well for taking the time out of your weekend to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you once again to Stacy for joining me to talk about The Darkness Rises. As I said, really liked the concept and the, again, issue, whatever you want to call Whitney's ability, and the problems it causes, and there's some good things that come out of it too, but you have to have problems to have plot. So I really appreciated that Whitney was very human, very, very relatable. I don't want to go back to high school in any way, shape, or form, and I really don't want to go back to high school and have any kind of supernatural ability. No, thank you. But it made for a good story. So if you are a fan of thrillers, definitely check this one out. Maybe you're not so sure about thrillers. Well, I'm the person to come to, because I won't steer you wrong. If it's icky, I always let you know this one. It's not graphic. It's not super scary. I think it's a really good. It's a. Can you say a fun read when it comes to, you know what I mean? Like it's engaging. It is. It's got some comedic relief. It has twists and turns, like I said. So yeah, it's a good way to enter the world of thrillers, and I think it's a good way. But if you also have someone that you need to buy a book for and they are a fan of thrillers, then you should look into this one as well. As I mentioned, we're doing thriller number 3 next week on the episode. I have returning guest. This will be Mary's 3rd time on the podcast. Mary Kaliikoa will be talking about her standalone novel. The first 2 times she's been here, we've talked about series. This time we're talking about a standalone novel, Don't Ask, Don't Follow. And so I'm looking forward to having Mary back on the podcast. I hope that you will join me for that episode. In the meantime, if you are a fan of this podcast, there are lots of things that you can do to be supportive. You can like, follow, subscribe, like I said, on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching the podcast on. That is helpful, gets that algorithm going, gets this podcast out to more readers like yourselves, which is great. You can leave a positive review. That is super, super helpful, and again, helps the algorithm. So it really does help out the podcast. And you can find the podcast on social media. So if you are on Facebook, Instagram, X, or TikTok, you can find the podcast. By extension, me. You can see some updates on the episodes, etc. But come find me. Tell me what you've been reading. Again, I always like to know, have you read any of the authors that I've had on the podcast? Which ones, did you discover any new podcasts? Come feed my nosiness. You know I love it. So come find the podcast on social media. In the meantime, hope you're having a great week. Please remember to put sunscreen on, even if it's overcast. Do me a favor and just wear lots and lots and lots of sunscreen. That will make me happy. Maybe you're just going to go outside and read. Well, put on sunscreen. But I hope whatever is happening with your week this week, with your time this week, whether it's sunny or not, whether you're hopefully wearing sunscreen or not, you do you. But I hope the week gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Mm-hmm. 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 Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to